Welcome to A Fair Share to End Child Labor, Survivors and Leaders on Social Protection, an event during the United Nations General Assembly during the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. I am Winnie Nyandiga, a youth activist in Kenya and Africa Regional Organizer for the 100 Million Campaign. Nobel laureates, world leaders, child labor survivor advocates, and youth activists have come together today to discuss our collective responsibility to the millions of children being forced into poverty and child labor every day. We are so pleased you have joined us. I would like to welcome the founder of Laureates and Leaders for Children, a decades-long champion for the rights of children and Nobel Peace Laureate to open our event today, Kailash Satyarthi.
Thank you. My dear children of the world, Your Excellencies, Prime Minister Löfven, Director General Ryder, Madam Amira, sisters and brothers. On behalf of Laureates and Leaders for Children, and in partnership with ILO, Sweden, and Norway, I welcome you. I welcome you with deep gratitude, concerns, and urgency. Needless to say that we are meeting at a very critical time when our children are facing one of the worst catastrophes in the history. We are marking this year as the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. But whenever I speak that we are witnessing the increase in child labor in last 2 decades, my head hangs down with shame. There is no justification, there is no excuse for that. Dear friends, we are running against the time and tide. But whenever the people stand with deeper collective conviction and resolve and determination to march on, then nothing can stop them. We are the people who are ready to march on. We are the people to turn the tide down, holding the time in our hands. We are ready to march on. Dear friends, we have succeeded in reducing child labor by 100 million in the past with lesser resources and knowledge. But today, we are in better situation. So we can do it again in a faster pace now. We are ready to learn from our successes and willing to learn from our failures. In addition to strengthening the successful strategies of past learnings, including investment in education, strong rule of law, and responsible business, we have to be bold. In the light of pandemic, as we know that it has brought disastrous impact on children, we have to be direct and swift because our children cannot wait. This is possible by providing social protection to all children in low-income countries who have been made to become more vulnerable for child labor, trafficking, and slavery. We also know that these children have faced intergenerational discrimination and inequality. We have seen positive impact and greater success in the investment in social protection over the years and COVID relief measures taken by G7 and Europe. Today, Laureates and Leaders has released a calculation. Just $52 billion can provide social protection to every child and pregnant woman in low-income countries. And this amount is less than 2 days of COVID relief measures taken in G7 countries and equivalent to just 0.4% spent in social protection programs in Europe. We have seen positive impact in many ways, and this is the time to act with a sense of urgency. Dear friends, we have to take concrete measures in establishing this initiative so that this would be the first step to establish Global Social Protection Fund. Despite the grim situation, we are witnessing that how the survivors, youth leaders, trade unions, workers, teachers unions, governments, intergovernmental agencies under the leadership of ILO, faith leaders, employers' bodies, and civil society organizations have brought tremendous hope in the fight against child labor. So we are hopeful. In the past 4 decades, I can tell you that I have seen encouraging successes in the global movement against child labor. I have also experienced some shattering failures. I have carried the dead bodies of my colleagues who have been killed by the slave masters while they were rescuing children. So I can tell you, and I can assure you, that no failure is the end of story. The shackles of slavery can never be stronger than the quest for freedom. We will fight and we will win. We have to march on now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kailash, for your leadership and your remarks today. It gives me great pleasure to introduce an inspiring young woman and survivor advocate, Khushboo Sharma.
नमस्ते, मेरा नाम खुशबू है। मैं राज्य सचिव हूँ और बाल मित्र ग्राम गोपालपुरा से। हमारे देश जैसे ऐसे अनेक देश हैं जहाँ बाल विवाह, बाल शोषण, बाल मजदूरी, बाल दुर्व्यवहार आदि होते हैं, जिसका कारण है गरीबी। और इन्हीं देशों में ऐसे भी लोग हैं जो कि अमीर है, जो कि अपना अच्छा सा जीवन व्यतीत कर रहे हैं। हम सबको ऐसे बच्चों की मदद करनी चाहिए जो कि गरीब है, ताकि वे भी अपना अच्छा सा जीवन व्यतीत कर सके, उनकी तरह उनके साथ कदम से कदम मिलाकर चल सके। मैं सभी बच्चों के लिए चैलेंज कर रही हूँ कि जो सरकार के पास इतना पैसा है, वो इन पैसों का उपयोग किस चीज़ में ले रही है, कहाँ कर रही है, तथा सरकार के जैसे हमारे देश में ऐसे अनेक भी अमीर लोग हैं। इन सबको ऐसे बच्चों की मदद करनी चाहिए जो कि गरीब है, ताकि वे अपने सभी सपने साकार कर सकें। आज जो यहाँ जो लोग बैठे हैं, क्या ये इन सभी बातचीतों से कह रहे हैं कि सभी गरीब बच्चों की मदद करनी चाहिए?
Thank you so much, Khushboo, for your powerful words. Now, it is an incredible honor to introduce the Prime Minister of Sweden, His Excellency Stefan Löfven.
Dear children, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, thank you, laureates and leaders for children, the ILO, and thank you, Mr. Satyarthi, for inviting me to speak here today. I'm proud to be at this event. But I also wish that we didn't have together here today, but sadly, there are many reasons for us to do so. I want to thank you for not giving up, for continuing to raise awareness, for pushing decision makers and influential actors to step up. Dear friends, this year is the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. Yet 160 million children around the world remain trapped in child labor. 160 million. And for the first time in the past 20 years, we are also witnessing an increase in the number of children in child labor. What is even more worrying is that these statistics were compiled before the pandemic. Ending child labor cannot be accomplished with a quick fix. We need to look at the root causes. Poverty is the main underlying cause of child labor, and poverty has increased in many countries during the pandemic. Education has also come under pressure with school closures, and an empty school desk is likely to mean a child in child labor. So we need to keep children in schools and offer adults social protection and decent working conditions to end child labor. And we must focus on the poorest and the most vulnerable. Sweden will always support the work to end child labor. We will continue to be a major donor of international aid. We will, together with our EU partners, work to abolish child labor in our supply chains and strengthen the labor inspection systems that monitor and enforce child labor laws. And we will, of course, continue to support international actors in their work to end child labor. Universal ratification of the ILO Convention on the worst forms of child labor last year was a major achievement, and many of you here today deserve the credit for that. Now, we urge states also to ratify the ILO Minimum Wage Age Convention and actively implement both of these conventions. This is a critical time, so we need to step up our efforts to promote and protect the rights of the child. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Excellency. I am now very happy to welcome the Director General of the International Labour Organization, Mr. Ryder.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me first thank our partners, Kailash Satyarthi, the Government of Sweden, for bringing us together for this most important meeting. It's an inspiration to participate with Kailash. It's a great pleasure to share a platform with Prime Minister Löfven, but I want to say particularly it is interacting with child labour survivors like Khushboo, who we just heard, which is perhaps the strongest motivation to move forward with this fight for the elimination of child labour. She is a reminder, is she not, of what is at stake in the fight against child labour, what can be achieved when we rescue people from child labour, and what is lost when we fail to do so. And the bad news, and Prime Minister Löfven has just reminded us of it, is that in recent years we have seen for the first time this century an increase rather than a decrease in the extent of child labour in the world. This even before we factor in the likely consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic. And it is a tragic irony, is it not, that this happens precisely in the year that we are celebrating the International Year for the Eradication of Child Labour. We can do better, we must do better. What does this mean? Well, in the first place, it means making sure that in these difficult times where the world of work has been turned upside down by the COVID-19 pandemic, we do not allow the fight against child labour to fall beneath the radar screen, to fall from our list of priorities. There really can be no more compelling priority than that of eliminating child labour. It is extraordinarily encouraging, is it not, that every country in the world has ratified the ILO's Convention against the worst forms of child labour, and yet the reality on the ground is that half of that 160 million child labourers in the world today are engaged in hazardous forms of work which is damaging to their physical well-being and their moral integrity. One of the ways that we need to ensure that we move forward and not backwards is through, and this has been emphasised by previous speakers, is by the universal provision of adequate social protection to children and to their families. Something which perhaps we've considered out of reach in the past, but as Kailash has mentioned, the numbers involved, the financial investment involved is absolutely possible and absolutely necessary. So let's place social protection at the centre of our strategies and truly attack these root causes of child labour. If we do that, we can look forward, after all, to meeting that global commitment made in the 2030 agenda to eliminate all forms of child labour by 2025. We must not give up on this. We must redouble our efforts. Thank you.
Thank you, Director General. Our last speaker in the opening session is African Union's Commissioner for Social Affairs, Her Excellency Amira Fadil.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to start by thanking the organizers for selecting the issue of child labor at the center of this side event. Child labor is one of the biggest challenges Africa has. Statistics of the International Labour Organization shows that 72.1 million children in Africa are affected by child labor, among which 31.5 million engaged in hazardous work. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, African countries have made several commitments to address child labor. In 1990, African states adopted the African Charter on the Rights and Welfare of the Child, which under Article 15 states that children should be protected from all forms of economic exploitation and from performing any work that is likely to be hazardous or interfere with their physical, mental, spiritual, or moral or social development. As a continent, the African Union has adopted a 10-year action plan for the elimination of child labor, forced labor, modern slavery, and human trafficking, 2020-2030. This was adopted in February 2020. The action plan provides an immediate framework for mobilizing African Union institutions, member states, regional economic communities, and other partners on the continent to scale up efforts and accelerate progress toward the achievement of the AU Agenda 2063 and target 8.7 of the Sustainable Development Goals. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, today's event takes place 3 months after Africa celebrated the Day of the African Child on the 16th of June on the theme 30 years after the adoption of the Charter, accelerate implementation of Agenda 2040. The AU Executive Council also of Ministers adopted the Agenda 2040, fostering an Africa fit for children. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the COVID-19 pandemic has vividly portrayed the impact of crisis and emergency situations on children's well-being. Due to COVID-19 pandemic, states have taken numerous restrictive measures to prevent the spread of the virus, including closure of schools and economic sectors. Due to such measures, many parents have become unemployed, and children who have been out of school during the closure remained out of school even after the opening of the school. This is due to the fact that many children joined the labor market as they had no education and their families were economically struggling. The pandemic revealed the already weak social protection systems that exist in many countries. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, the event today is an opportunity for us to reflect on the situation and to discuss strategies to end child labor through measures aimed at improving access to quality education, social protection, and decent work, while building child protection systems, improving birth registration, and addressing gender norms and discrimination. It is also a good start towards other forums, including the 5th Global Conference on Child Labor, which Africa will be hosting for the first time in South Africa in 2022. Excellencies, I strongly believe that post-COVID-19 recovery policies should consider the fact that COVID-19 has pushed many children to become child laborers, and that children in child labor are most likely to be excluded from social protection systems. Excellencies, we need to work more on eliminating the root causes for child labor by fighting poverty and eliminating poverty and social injustices. Thank you very much.
Mimi naitwa Devi, niko class 3, Sylvia Plate shule. Nimekuja hapa Boma kuungi ingine nipe mkoro ingine nsave. Kani 9. Mimi ni last. Blessing. Sipema msa zingine upata tu kazi, kuna senya patangi kazi. Ama anapata kazi analipa saa moja. Atengeneza 100, nampea 50 na save 50. Saa zingine kuna gari yenye huku jana machupa, usipochungu unakatwa labda unakatwa mguu. Shikrakishwa tu kidogo kidogo. Hapa ni kwa nyumba yetu. Huyu ni mamangu, yule mwenye anafua ni sister yangu. Hapo ngozi niziko hapo ni mamangu ndio mwenye anafua apate do. Atupeza sapa, atukule lunch. Tena kesho tuniendelee.
Simu yangu inalia.
Now it is time for our first of 3 dialogues today. We will be discussing the child labor crisis and its implications on the SDGs. I am your moderator, Winnie Nyandiga. With 10,000 more 5 to 11-year-old children forced into child labor every day from 2016 and 2020, not only is the international commitment to child labor under threat, but so is the wider Agenda 2030 commitment to leave no one behind. The number of extremely marginalized children is increasing, not decreasing. SDG 8.7, which calls for the elimination of child labor in all its forms by 2025, is linked to more than 60% of all SDGs. The children who are trapped in child labor are the same children who are denied an education, who suffer the most health outcomes, and have little access to clean water and sanitation. Ladies and gentlemen, we are at crossroads in achieving the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Now on to our powerful speakers. His Excellency Ulstein, who is the Minister for International Development in Norway. Two young, powerful people on the panel today. Ms. Rebekka from Namibia, who is the Fair Share campaign lead in Namibia, and Mr. Manan Ansari, who is a child labor survivor. To you, Rebekka, what are the most urgent interventions that are needed to reverse the increase of child labor and prevent the failure of Agenda 2030 commitment? As a young person, share with us what are the urgent interventions. What should be done in Namibia? What should world leaders who are here today and some of us listening to us, what should we do?
To our Excellencies, greetings. I am humbled to be accorded this opportunity to amplify the voices of the Namibian children whose aspirations I carry. Progress has been made in the fight against child labor. However, progress has not only slowed, however, it's in reverse. There are thousands of children that are still trapped in poverty and child labor. And unfortunately, we do not have updated in-country data analysis to reflect such realities. Marginalized children continue to have little to no access of proper health care, education, proper sanitation, and are facing violence. And this is why the Fair Share campaign is timely in countries such as Namibia. The urgent interventions needed to reverse the looming child rights catastrophe include the urgent need to strengthen new laws and implement the existing legislative framework. In the African context, where child labor has been normalized, policies must clearly define what child labor is, how it affects the dignity of children, annual budgets that directly channel funds towards initiatives working to create safer spaces for children, harsher penalties on perpetrators, proper rehabilitation of survivors that provide psychological help, continuous engagements that measure the progress of such initiatives with parliamentarians and capacitated watchdogs within our security forces to handle reported cases. The connection between the trafficking of children and forces against child labor must be addressed, not only in the country, but also across the borders. Further, Winnie, strategic resource planning and mobilization is a crucial element in successfully eliminating child labor. The world has more than enough money to end exploitation of children. And if we are to build back better, our leaders need to put their money where their mouth is, respectfully. This is where we need to collaborate with all pillars of society, both from the public sector, religious, private sector, teachers, workers' unions, to invest in the future of these children. Through engagements, we can identify the social responsibilities that private sector needs to deliver to seek and collect resources for projects working against child labor. Lastly, social protection in the wake of COVID-19 pandemic, implementing social protection interventions must be reprioritized. I repeat, implementing social protection interventions must be reprioritized. Flaws like cash transfers and programs are a necessity for the most vulnerable children and their communities. These are my submissions of the interventions that we can possibly ponder on to eliminate child labor. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Rebekka. And you raise very pertinent issues when you say that in Africa, where child labor has been normalized, our legislatures, we need to go back and define what child labor is. Over to you, Mr. Manan. As a child labor survivor advocate, and even as you are marking the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor, what are the interventions? In Africa, we have normalized child labor. and we are looking forward to define our policies. In India and in Asia, what are the interventions that our leaders must do to address the child labor crisis?
Thank you very much. Namaste everyone. My name is Manan Ansari and I'm a youth leader at the Kailash Satyarthi Children's Foundations. Today I'm so delighted to be the part of this event. Today here I'm representing those millions of children who cannot see dreams like me and like you, who cannot read and write. But today I say that the children whom I am representing today have the same potential, quest, energy and the life as the children who are getting good and quality education. But instead of going to school, they are working in factories, dhabas, hotel and everywhere. Today, I want to give a flashback of my life. I belong to Samseria village. The state is Jharkhand. I want to tell you that Kodarma is one of the highest mica producers in all over the world. Before 15 years ago, there was no facility for the medical and the schools. And when I was just 6 years old, I used to work in mica mines. I used to go to work at 9 a.m. in the morning and I used to come back at 6 p.m. And for this, I used to get only 20 rupees, which is less than a $0.40 in a day. One fine day, when my friend was going to work, he went down to collect the mica. If you want to collect the mica, then you will have to go more than 200 to 300 feet down inside. And mica is very, very sharp. It is used to make some cosmetic things. And it is also used to paint the cars. So especially when my friend was going down, suddenly when my friend was going down, suddenly the mines collapsed down and he got death over there. I often try to forget this incident, but I could not. But often I say that I will fight till the last breath of my life that no child should lose his or her life in the mines anymore. Sorry for the interruption. So when my friend was going down and when he was trying to come up, suddenly the mines collapsed and he could not make it out alive that day. I often try to forget this incident, but I cannot. As the whole world is dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, and it has affected almost each and every country, but nobody will feel the worst impact of it as the world's most marginalized young children and young people. Children are hard to reach villages, children in illegal slums, children are forced to work. Most of them will experience both immediate and longer term sufferings if the world does not act now. We all need to stand together. We have to do our bit. Now we all need to stand together to demand fair share, to end the child slavery and to ensure protection for each and every child. Because we all are interlinked. What happens to me impacts you. What happens to you impacts me. So we all are interlinked with each other. And it is the globalization of compassion what needed the most right now. So we all need to come together. I urge everybody, all the world leaders to take strong action to ensure the protection and to provide education, health, and food to all the children who have affected mostly with the COVID-19 pandemic. So do your bit to ensure that all children are free, safe, educated, and protected. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Mr. Manan. Such a powerful session of two young people, not only highlighting the urgent interventions that should be done, but also standing in solidarity with world's children who are vulnerable to child labor. Your Excellency, everything rises and falls in leadership. In the wake of COVID-19, and even with the new statistics on child labor, we are in trouble. What are the urgent interventions? What should you and other powerful world leaders do to save the next generation? We are in trouble. We are almost losing the next generation. Over to you, Mr. Minister.
Thank you so much, Winnie, and namaste, Manan and Rebekka. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for sharing your difficult but really strong story. The clock is ticking like never before, but we are moving backwards, and I think we really need to be honest about this. We were supposed to end extreme poverty this decade, but the pandemic came and took away years of progress instead. We were supposed to end child labor, as we'd heard, by 2025. But every day, 10,000 children are being forced into child labor, not released from it. And it is not only because of COVID-19. This backsliding has been going on since 2016. Again, we need to be honest about this. These numbers are as shocking and heartbreaking as the stories of each and every child having their dearest possessions stolen from them in this way. So it is time we step up and offer them their fair share. And I'm very grateful to you, Kailash, and your foundation, and other laureates and leaders for children for giving us this opportunity to address this important topic and come together. And I have to say thank you for your opening remarks, Kailash. This is what it's all about. It's about the boys and girls that are carrying, dying, and the childhood that are destroyed, and our responsibility in the midst of this. So this needs to be a launchpad for stepping up to do more. And the world is, as we all know, in the midst of the pain that the pandemic are causing. And at the same time, we can now see some of the destructive and more long-term effects of COVID-19. It is so clear, and clearer than ever, that we must do more to protect the most marginalized ones and vulnerable amongst us. Social safety nets are more important than ever to get us through this and back on our feet as individuals and societies. So are schools. Schools are where children prepare for a future job and perhaps for creating jobs for others. There is no way that we will eliminate poverty without education, and there is no way we will eliminate poverty without bringing children back to school, be it from COVID or slavery. So that is why Norway integrates anti-slavery efforts into other aspects of our development policy also. So let's come together. Let's really come together and run the last lap towards 2030 together. And it's actually not the last lap. This should be the first lap, the most important one, that government, civil society, multilateral partners together. One important inclusion milestone will be when Norway now are hosting the second Global Disability Summit in February 2022. So in order to succeed, we must reach the most marginalized and vulnerable groups. So again, we really have to offer them a better deal, a fair share. Thank you so much again, Winnie, for giving me this opportunity. Over to you again.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Thank you so much, Mr. Minister, and the powerful session by the young people.
Now, I'd like to welcome a video message from the Permanent State Secretary at the Federal Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs in Germany, Mr. Björn Boyning.
Ladies and gentlemen, it's a great pleasure to speak to you today at this important event on the fight against child labor. 2021 is the UN International Year for the Elimination of Child Labor. Sadly, the latest global estimates published by ILO and UNICEF speak for themselves. 160 million children were in child labor around the world at the beginning of 2020, accounting for almost 1 in 10 of all children worldwide. 79 million children, nearly half of all those in child labor, were in hazardous work that directly endangers their health, safety, and moral development. The COVID crisis has further exacerbated the situation worldwide and menaces the progress made in the fight against child labour. However, only 4 years remain to abolish child labour in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. We need to do a lot more using all available policy tools and instruments. It is essential to look at structural root causes and interrelated human rights issues like poverty, limited access to education, and the repression of workers' rights. A significant proportion of child labour is found in global supply chains. This is one area where the governments of industrial countries must act. In June 2021, Germany therefore took an important step forward by adopting the Act on Corporate Due Diligence Obligations for the Prevention of Human Rights Violations in Supply Chains. The new mandatory approach is a consequence of our National Action Plan for implementing the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. The Act obliges companies of a certain size to take adequate measures against human rights violations in their supply chains, including child labour. This includes risk analysis, preventive and remedial measures, establishing a complaints process, and reporting on their efforts. A public body, the Federal Office for Economic Affairs and Export Control, will enforce the Act robustly. Infringements can lead to fines of up to 8 million euros or 2% of the company's annual global turnover. Companies that have been fined will, as a rule, be excluded from public contracts for an appropriate period of up to 3 years. Germany's Act is a very important step. Nevertheless, the fight against child labour in a global economy can only be won if we join forces and succeed in establishing a level playing field for all companies around the world. We therefore strongly welcome the European Commission's plan to propose mandatory due diligence obligations at EU level, and we support any initiative to create a binding global standard.
Thank you, Mr. Boyning. Next is our second dialogue, a global responsibility, a fair share for the most marginalized children, which will be moderated by the chairperson for Global March Against Child Labour, Mr. Tim Ryan.
Hello, everyone, and I really want to thank laureates and leaders, Kailash, Satyarthi, and the Swedish government for being able to sponsor this forum, an absolutely critical forum at a critical moment of time. As we've heard, while child labor has increased between 2016 and 2020, in the same period, the world became over $10 million richer, and it's clear that the world's poorest children and their families did not receive their fair share in this context. Inequality has continued to grow during the pandemic, and the international response to COVID-19 has provided little support for the world's poorest families who needed help the most, with just 0.13% of the COVID-19 emergency funding going to low-income countries. If child labor exists anywhere, it's the responsibility of governments, businesses, and other stakeholders everywhere to help eliminate it, particularly, as speakers have pointed out, in a year such as the designated year to eliminate child labor. Social protection works for people and for governments. It reduces poverty, inequality, and child labor, and increases participation in education, economic growth, and employment. To this day, social protection is the largest area of government expenditure in rich countries, yet it is less than 2% of their overseas development assistance. Lower income countries still need support of international aid. However, they must also find the fiscal space in their domestic budgets to implement the social protection that covers their citizens all across all stages of life, including starting, from the beginning. So our question today for this distinguished panel is, how can we support a global commitment to social protection for marginalized children and their families? And I would like to ask the speakers, to the point, we have very little time, what is a key idea? What is a key critical event or action that, from your perspective, needs to happen in order to make this global commitment actually take place? We would like to start, actually, with a short video statement by Ms. Anousheh Karvar, who is the French government's ILO delegate to the governing body and is the chair of Alliance 8.7. And then we will hear from our distinguished panel of speakers.
Excellencies, leaders and laureates, dear friends, dear colleagues, let me first congratulate you, dear Kailash Satyarthi, for your appointment as SDG advocate. The United Nations needs your determination and power of advocacy. As we all know, child labor has increased for the first time in 20 years. And if we don't take urgent measures, the economic and social consequences of the pandemic, when added to the massive closure of schools, will likely aggravate this further. This is a wake-up call. At the current pace, the international community will not meet the objectives of eradicating child labor in 2025. We know what works: access to education, access to social protection, decent work for parents, policy coherence, and strong legal frameworks. We all have different responsibilities, but we can all contribute our fair share to end child labor. This is what the Global Partnership Alliance 8.7 is about: build up with all stakeholders a global solidarity-based response. Developed countries have particular responsibilities. They must prohibit child labor through the supply chains of their companies and in their trade agreements. I call upon all of you to join the Alliance 8.7. I thank you.
Thank you, Madam Karvar, and we appreciate the opportunity to talk with this distinguished panel today. I would like to first actually call on Mr. Martin Chungong, the groundbreaking Secretary General of the Inter-Parliamentary Union. Our question is, how can we support the global commitment to social protection, and are there particular issues or particular actions that you feel we can take to make this happen?
Yeah, thank you very much, team, for this opportunity. And I want to thank Kailash, my good friend, for allowing me to be part of this conversation. I bring to the table the views and experience of the global parliamentary community. And like all of us and previous speakers, we are alarmed at the exponential increase in the number of children involved in child labor. And the situation is so alarming that we need, as somebody said earlier, the minister from Norway said earlier, we need to act now. What I would like to put on the table are proposals or measures that I think are within the realm of Parliament's constitutional mandate. And I want to offer this suggestion so that we can see how we can mobilize the goodwill that is already available in the parliamentary community to move forward. And the point I think we're all making is that we need to ensure that social protection works for children, especially the most vulnerable of them. And the first thing I think that we should do is to ensure that these children are guaranteed access to basic social services. We have, as parliamentarians, to institute mechanisms that provide social protection for children without parental care, because many of the victims of child labor are children who are without the support of their parents. I also think that we can make great progress in strengthening existing social networks that meet the needs of families, in particular those in marginalized groups. We also, and I think the parliaments are very well placed to do this, need to monitor mechanisms that prevent children from falling into extreme poverty. And let me use the opportunity also to congratulate Kailash on his appointment as SDG advocate. We need to work together to strengthen efforts to combat extreme poverty. So I want to put on the table the ability of parliaments to make laws, to allocate resources, budgetary resources, and to hold government accountable for efforts to combat child labor. All of this, I think, are within the powers of parliament. We need to be seen to be wielding those powers to good effect. That is, bringing down the number of children who are involved in child labor around the world. So, again, the time is now to act. Thank you very much, team.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chungong. Really appreciate it. I'd like to turn now to another groundbreaker, Ms. Sharan Burrow, the first woman General Secretary, actually, of the International Trade Union Confederation, representing hundreds of millions of workers around the world. Over to you, Sharan. You're on mute.
Sorry, Tim.
There we
Classic, virtual technology failure. So can I say, first of all, thank you, Tim, and I'm delighted to be part of this distinguished panel. But, it is time to act. And by any measure, your introduction is correct. These children, poor families, have not had their fair share. But equally, Anousheh and the German minister are correct too, because if we don't have responsibility from government, from countries, from the international community, including the development aid scandal that you talked about, we will not see a reduction in child labour. We thought that when we set out to actually get the child labour conventions, the minimum age conventions for work ratified, and when it was universal, we could celebrate. Instead, you all know the tragedy, and no one has been a stronger advocate than Kailash. So I'm glad he's also continuing in a UN role. But social protection is absolutely fundamental. If parents have social protection, if that social protection includes vital public services, health, education, childcare, aged care, the things that actually allow workers and their families to have hope for themselves and their children, and that means decent jobs as well, then we can make a change. If the world reinvested in full employment, if we had jobs in care, in renewable energy, in areas that have to shift because of both development deficits and indeed the climate crisis, we can create a world of decent work where children are not actually the victims of exploitation. And I really want to emphasise that the only challenge we have, and you said it, what's the one big idea? The only challenge we have is to have the richer world, governments, IFIs, anybody who can make a difference, build a universal social protection fund. Because if we have a fund to build those social protection systems for the 55% of the world's people who have no social protection, and for the 72% who have little or no social protection, then it returns money and jobs to the economy. Our own research shows you can get a dividend of up to 1.9%. That's what's called a return on investment in development. So let's get universal social protection. Let's invest in full employment, in the jobs that can make a difference. Let's repair a broken labour market so working families have hope. And let's put in place the commitment to our children for a decent future based on strong, quality, public, free education. We can do it, but everybody must want to extend that solidarity.
Thanks very much, Sharan. Really appreciate that and the support of the International Trade Union Movement. Would like to turn now to Ms. Francesca Awa Mbuli, the survivor from the Survivors Network, the founder of the Survivors Network of Cameroon. Please.
Thank you, Tim. Your Excellencies here present, I'm honored. I'm Awa Francesca Mbuli, as Tim already introduced. I would just wish to throw more light and emphasize on the points already highlighted. What we've come together to suggest are leaders need to come together and agree on a package to help low-income countries and ensure the most vulnerable to this situation receive at least some support. Looking at what we do in Cameroon, our organization, we try a lot to make sure that women and girls are economically empowered because we believe that women are the backbone of our society. We have sorted out ways to get involved in this aspect by mobilizing families living under the poverty range and empowering the mothers with startup capital. And from this, averagely, we know that if a mother is empowered, at least 4 children are being socially protected because the income she generates from her little business we offer keeps food on the table and maybe, by God willing, send the children to school. Also, as already highlighted by Mr. Chungong, a legislation needs to be put in place by all countries and companies within countries to develop laws to prevent child labor and from end to end across the global supply chain to stop children entering work, to stop companies using child labor in their supply chains and the points of farming, mining, manufacturing, and production, and to hold companies accountable for using child labor at any tier in their supply chain. Also, social protection measures, including transfers, work best when they go hand in hand with measures which tackle multiple forms of deprivation, such as improved access to distribution of food items. And also, we need to highlight that with the present of COVID-19 situation, distribution of washable, reusable face masks, as well as locally handmade sanitizers, and also tap bucket water needs to be provided to family and household that are underprivileged. Because if we don't do that, we know that they stand the risk of being infected by the global pandemic. But looking at it, how can we support a global commitment to social protection for marginalized children and their families? Just briefly, in order to fully commit and support marginalized children and their families, every one of us needs to get involved at our own local levels. We need to provide social services, which provided care, support, and create measures targeting especially the most vulnerable parents and caregivers, including mothers, the elderly, and people with disabilities, so that they will be able
to. It looks like we have a little technical glitch there.
And also themselves. Protection that proactively
I'm afraid we're having difficulties with Ms. Mbuli there. I'm going to give it another few seconds to see if we can reconnect. We did hear a very powerful message in this regard, but I think if we can reconnect in a few minutes, perhaps there might be an opportunity for another question or two. Ms. Mbuli, are you back?
Yeah, I'm back, sir. I'm sorry for the inconvenience. That's how we struggle to go along with our work. So as I was saying, and almost done, an action needs to be taken within the framework of protection that proactively identifies groups of children and young people who have been systematically and consistently marginalized, such as children and young people without parental care, to be associated to foster homes and families. And these families need support as well from their governments. And in our own little effort, our organization, Survivors Network, has come up with a child-friendly space that we organize in a small office once every fortnight. And this is because recently and ongoing, there's been a crisis that has struck Cameroon, and most of these children have lost their childhood as children. And to bring them back in that state, we do this activity often to see that they have the rights as children to play and watch cartoons. So notwithstanding, I stand here as a survival leader, working with children and women to plead leaders across the globe here present and those listening to make an effort so that jointly we need to put to ground child labor. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we'd like to turn to our final speaker, Ms. Carmen Romero of the Steering Committee of the Global Student Forum, representing hundreds of student organizations around the world. Ms. Romero?
Thank you. Dear esteemed guests, survivors and friends, first of all, let me thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here today participating in this event for such an important cause. As student unions and activists united in defending the right to quality education for all, the fight to end child labor is our fight too. And we, as the Global Student Forum, representing 198 student unions across 120 countries, have been proud to endorse and support the First Year to End Child Labor campaign since the beginning. The very definition of child labor includes work that is not only mentally, physically, socially, or morally dangerous and harmful to children, but that also interferes with their schooling. There are children and young people experiencing simultaneous human rights abuses, and it is a stain on our humanity that even before COVID-19, we allowed an increase in this injustice. At the beginning of 2020, 63 million girls and 97 million boys were in child labor globally, accounting for almost 1 in 10 of all children worldwide. These are not just numbers. These are the lives of people who don't have any chance to improve their reality. This is not happening because they don't want to study. They are denied even that choice. No, this is happening simply because of where they were born into countries and communities that are facing systemic discrimination in an equal world. In 1516, Tomás Moro wrote Utopia, and I quote literally, "I can have no other notion of all the other governments that I see or know than that they are a conspiracy of the rich who, on pretense of managing the public, only pursue their private ends and devise all the ways and arts they can find out." In my opinion, this quote seems to prevail nowadays. Child labor is a social disease that our world suffers from and a social punishment for the people having to endure it and to survive it. Where child labor is more prevalent, it's not accidental. Let's think in which countries child labor continue to exist and continue to rise. It is in the same countries that are not underdeveloped but overplundered for generations by countries in the global north who have taken advantage of their resources for our own benefit and are now richer than ever before. Those countries, my country included, have to take responsibility for this staggering rise in global inequality that is causing the fastest rise in poverty since records began and forcing millions and millions of children into work. My generation and the student movement I represent are now demanding more than just empty words or gestures. We demand accountability. And as I said many times before, we do not demand charity, we demand justice. Social protection and welfare for all is justice. The world, its economy and its market today just works for the few rich people who can afford it. It is time to say no to this economic system that is drowning children and will drown us all, and say yes to a fairer and more equal world where no one is left behind. Changing the world is not utopic, but necessary. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Romero. And I want to thank the entire panel for both creative and critical ideas that we all need to support in order to make this commitment by our elected leaders around the world actually happen. In the interest of time, I think there's a lot to discuss in this, but in the interest of time, I'll turn the proceedings back to the organizers, and once again thank this distinguished panel very much for your participation and your assistance in this incredible and critical moment for the child labor movement. Thank you.
Thank you for another excellent discussion. I would now like to introduce a video message from the Assistant Director General for Education at UNESCO, Ms. Stefania Giannini.
Excellencies, it's an honor to join laureates and leaders to call for an end to child labor and all the demeaning conditions that allowed it to prevail and worse still increase. COVID-19 has put the right to education of the world's most marginalized and vulnerable children under severe threat, we know. Poverty means that 24 million students are at risk today of not pursuing their studies, with the largest share in South and West Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa. We can end child labor with political resolve, legal measures, and global cooperation. This requires a whole-of-government approach and multidimensional responses from prevention to early intervention, protection, and reintegration measures. The quality of traditional apprenticeship and on-the-job learning needs upgrading, together with improved certification. UNESCO works on the legislative front to strengthen national frameworks on the right to education for every child. Through our Eratlas monitoring tool, we signal whether laws on labor and education are aligned in terms of ages. With over 100 million children still affected by full or partial school closure, this is a critical time to step up joint action through special measures to reach those who are at greatest risk of never returning to school. Recovery packages are not providing, unfortunately, sufficient resources to education and related social services. Let me say, at best, the share allocated doesn't exceed 3%. Well, fulfilling the right to education is incompatible with child labor. With all our partners, we are strongly determined to act together to end it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Giannini. Next is a video message from the Minister of State, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Côte d'Ivoire, Her Excellency Mrs. Kandia Kamara.
Monsieur le Secrétaire général des Nations Unies, Honorable Kailash Satyarthi, lauréat du prix Nobel de la paix, honorable acteur de la protection de l'enfance, mesdames et messieurs, je salue l'organisation de ce panel de haut niveau sur un sujet qui me tient particulièrement à cœur, à la fois en tant que mère, éducatrice et membre du gouvernement d'un pays, la Côte d'Ivoire, dont le président, son Excellence M. Alassane Ouattara, a inscrit la lutte contre la traite, l'exploitation et le travail des enfants au cœur de l'action gouvernementale. Je me félicite également de la tenue du présent panel car il vient en écho au lancement officiel le 4 août dernier en Côte d'Ivoire de l'année internationale pour l'élimination du travail des enfants sous le parrainage de Mme Dominique Ouattara, première dame et présidente du Comité national de surveillance des actions de lutte contre ce fléau, contre lequel mon pays a mis en place un cadre institutionnel et élaboré un plan d'action national. Ce cadre institutionnel a été renforcé par la création de 2 comités, à savoir le Comité interministériel de lutte contre la traite, l'exploitation et le travail des enfants et le Comité national de surveillance des actions de lutte contre la traite, l'exploitation et le travail des enfants. Ce comité de surveillance est placé sous l'autorité directe de Madame la Première Dame Dominique Ouattara. Par ailleurs, sur instruction du Président de la République, le gouvernement a enrichi le cadre législatif et réglementaire de plusieurs textes à travers la ratification de la Charte africaine des droits et du bien-être de l'enfant, ainsi que de celle des conventions des Nations unies et de l'Organisation internationale du travail visant à réprimer et à punir la traite des personnes en général et des femmes et des enfants en particulier. En outre, l'Assemblée nationale a adopté depuis 2015 une loi instituant l'obligation scolaire pour tous les enfants de 6 à 16 ans. Cette loi, en plus de conforter les dispositions antérieures prises par le gouvernement pour interdire la traite et les pires formes de travail, vient réaffirmer la volonté et l'engagement de la Côte d'Ivoire d'affranchir l'enfant, tous les enfants sans exception, de toutes les formes de servitude et de lui donner toutes les chances de vivre pleinement sa vie d'enfant dans un cadre d'éducation inclusive. Mesdames et messieurs, les différentes enquêtes et études menées à ce jour mettent en exergue le lien entre la pauvreté et le travail des enfants, surtout en Afrique. Si nous convenons de cette corrélation, il conviendrait alors que la problématique de la pauvreté en Afrique et partout où sévit la traite des enfants soit adressée de façon diligente et holistique. Il y va de notre honneur et de notre dignité d'homme. Aussi, voudrais-je ici réaffirmer mon soutien personnel ainsi que les encouragements de son Excellence M. Alassane Ouattara, président de la République de Côte d'Ivoire, à la présente initiative de M. Kailash Satyarthi, prix Nobel de la paix et militant émérite de la cause de l'enfance. Je vous remercie.
Now it is time of our final dialogue of the event, removing systemic barriers, social protection, equality, and human dignity, which will be moderated by UN AIDS Special Ambassador and Global Spokesperson for Zero Discrimination, Ms. Lorena Castillo Garcia.
Good morning to all from New York. Merci beaucoup, Madame Dominique Guttera, Première Dame de la Côte d'Ivoire, pour votre participation. Merci. And I would like to give thanks to the government of Sweden and the Norwegian Minister of Foreign Affairs and the ILO for being the sponsors for this magnificent event. Well, we're going to be talking about removing systemic barriers, and we are going to present to you a dear friend of mine, Carrie Kennedy, president of the Foundation of Robert Kennedy Human Rights. She has a message as a member of the Laureates and Leaders Steering Committee.
Hi, I'm Carrie Kennedy, and I'm president of Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. Albert Camus said, "Perhaps this will always be a world in which children suffer, but we can reduce the number of suffering children." Today, working together, we can end the suffering of children. Every day, 160 million children are forced to work rather than going to school, an increase of more than 8 million over the last 4 years alone. That is more than all the children in the United States and Canada combined. These children suffer from malnutrition and have the least access to health care, clean water, and sanitation. 9 million additional children are at risk of being pushed into child labor by the end of 2022 as a result of the pandemic. That number may rise to 45 million. Further, if they don't have access to critical social protection coverage and austerity measures are introduced. This injustice against children will only stop if the root causes of child labor are tackled. Almost every country in the world has legislation against child labor, but this has not been supported by the resources to tackle underlying poverty. Together, we must put in place a safety net for the most vulnerable children in our world. Together, we want to work with governments to end child labor by delivering financial resources, public policies, and social protection for the most marginalized children and families who face generations of discrimination. We cannot achieve racial and economic justice. We cannot achieve the SDGs, whether in the United States or globally, without protecting every single child on Earth. The good news is the solution is within our reach. Through the leadership of Kailash Satyarthi, the ILO, and so many of the people gathered here today, we have learned vital lessons about what works. We have learned that no one can do this alone. We must combine forces of international organizations, governments, NGOs, and the private sector. Governments can make universal education a reality so that the 130 million children ages 6 to 11 who are now out of school, over half of whom are girls, have a decent education. Governments must protect the rights of all children and citizens and assure access to education is free, available, proximate, and of decent quality. We demand a fair share for all children and an end to child labor, a fair share in financial resources, policies, and social protection. The Fair Share to End Child Labor campaign is our collective opportunity to treat every child with the care and opportunity they deserve. Join us. Thank you.
Thank you, Carrie. Thank you so much for always being such a wonderful ambassador for all this work. And now we're going to go to our panel about social protection, equality, and human dignity. Hello, guys. How are you? Hello, welcome. You are in Brazil, right? And you are in South Sudan. Hello. Okay, we're going to keep the microphones on. And I'm going to present first Bianca Borges dos Santos. She is in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and she's the president of the Latin America and Caribbean Students Organization. Welcome to the panel.
Thank you very much.
It is an honor to see a girl.
Can you hear me?
Yes, it is an honor to see a girl, in front of this organization for Latin America and Caribbean. Welcome.
Oh, thank you very much. As a Democratic Student Union representative in both the Latin America and Caribbean Continental Organization of Students and also Global Students Forum, to fight for equality and human dignity is at the core of our work. We know that education is not only a fundamental human right, but also liberation, freedom, and justice. It is no secret that child labor is very common in less developed countries. In Latin America, the deep social inequality makes this reality common to a large part of the countries. Child labor, a legacy of colonialism, is also often associated with issues such as sexual exploitation, the new enslavement of native communities, and the illegal exploitation of our nation's natural resources for the international trafficking of minerals and other products. This exploitation that has existed for generations has led us to today, where the division between the richest and the poorest nations is greater than ever before. This gross inequality is forcing 160 million children to work at the expense of their childhood and education, and we cannot accept this reality. The tools to end this injustice are within our reach. We must work collectively to pressure our leaders at the local, national, and global level to prioritize the lives of children and young people above their own profit. What is most important to combat this reality is the adoption of policies aimed at combating social inequalities that deeply affect our society to this day. In the few countries in the region where we have a wide offer of public education and social assistance, such as Cuba, child labor is not a reality. And this shows that policies that allow broad access to education and that children and their families have the economic conditions to remain at school or university, that combat illegal economic activities, that protect native communities, and that combat ethnic-racial racial discrimination are the ways to overcome this scenario. And this means establishing real accountability of states and the international community for those rights that should be accessible to all, and real protection of the right to protection, equity, and human dignity. It means more than commitments, more than goodwill. It means the active and urgent redistribution of global power and wealth to deliver a fair share of resources and social protection for all.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And yes, I do agree with you 100%. Less bureaucracy, more action, more decisive action has to be taken in all these matters. And now I wanted to introduce to you from South Sudan, Winnie Francis. Mr. Winnie, how are you?
I'm okay. How are you?
I am good.
Hello, everyone.
When you were only 5 years old, you were forced into child labor, recruited as a child soldier, and you were faced the injustice of exploitation and pain of being separated from your family at such an early age. How do you recover from such an experience so strong and difficult? How do you get where you are now?
It has been really so much difficult, but I had to convince myself and put myself in the level of making change to the whole nation now. Talking about South Sudan, South Sudan is among the poorest countries in the world, having gained its independence recently in 2011. The education system just yet to be stable and bundled up with the recent conflicts and pandemic. There are contradictions and the corruption. The contradictions and corruption taking place right now that affects the government, agencies, businesses, individuals, and organizations. When I was at the age of 7, not 5, when I was at the age of 7, the attack that happened, and we were all abducted and taken to the field as a soldier. We were young, of course, but what we could do was to carry heavy weapons, food stuff, and water. Meanwhile, what I've been seeing through was that girls were being able to be taken for accepting to marrying the soldiers as young as they are. But we managed to escape. 5 people managed to escape with me, and suddenly only two survived. In 2018, after enough struggle, I managed to come up with Street Beats Foundation. We would walk along the streets of Juba, reciting poems, singing, engaging in comical talks, just to lure an audience. We will then take some time to talk about child labor, though it is very dangerous in South Sudan, as some of the child soldiers are highly radicalized. We have managed to engage a number of child soldiers to engage in education and to settle their families and other things. So sadly, when you walk around Juba now, you still meet a lot of child soldiers and laborers. Some join to provide security and fend for their families, mimed by rampant tribal and civil wars. Some just join because others have joined, and others have no one to turn them on, and since their families were either displaced or killed during the conflicts. We have joined the efforts with several media groups, artists, organizations, legal officers, politicians, and businesses to help raise this awareness. But still, it needs more effort. It needs the global world to intervene to help the situation of South Sudan. However, hard it is down here, we would like to engage the government and the national organizations, the civil servants, the people who are, most especially the activists of South Sudan and the globe, to put in efforts to see that every child is schooled, even through emulating from other neighboring countries. To me, child labor is like a mass murder to the future generation. To combat such severe poverty and suffering, so what can we do as a family and as a community is the question. So even though we are now on this platform, or even though we are new on this platform, we hope that we will stay strong together. We will have enough inspiration, support, and more ideas to help save the children of South Sudan and the entire world. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Winnie, for sharing this amazing experience that you had. This is so important. This is exactly why we call to all the leaders in the world. Thank you, Kailash, for uniting us all in this great broadcast. We call for more decisive action for the fair share for children and for all the leaders of the world, those with morals and values, to put as a priority our children's rights first. Now we're going to watch a video. Thank you again so much for this panel, and we go back.
मैं चंपा कुमारी बागमित्र ग्राम जमदार से हूँ। मैं बचपन में अपने हमारे घर की आर्थिक स्थिति बहुत ही खराब थी, जिसके कारण मैं अपने गार्जियन के साथ, माता पिता और भाई के साथ ढिवरे की खदान में काम किया करती थी। हमारे घर में खाने की कोई ठिकाना नहीं थी, जिसके कारण हम ढिवरे के खदान में काम करते थे। हमें बहुत सारी मजबूरियां झेलने पड़ती थी। हमारे हाथ कट जाती थी, पाँव कट जाती थी और किन्हीं लोगों का भी माथा फट जाता था। और हमें लालटेन लेकर के अंदर घुसना पड़ता था। डर लगता था कि कहीं पत्थर तो ना गिर जाए। लेकिन इस मजबूरी को झेलते हुए हम आगे बढ़े और हमारे माता पिता हमें पढ़ा नहीं पाते थे क्योंकि आर्थिक स्थिति बहुत ही खराब थी। कि कुछ अच्छा काम करना चाहिए हमें। जब किसी ने हमें स्कूल तक जोड़े तो हमें भी किसी और को स्कूल तक जोड़ना, अच्छा काम करना। तो हम भी बाल विवाह, बाल मजदूर, बाल शिकार के खिलाफ आवाज उठाने लगे।
The closing session of our event today will outline the next steps the international community must take in order to end this child rights catastrophe and provide a resilient foundation for all our children. To begin, we welcome 1996 Nobel Peace Laureate, former president of Timor-Leste and convener of the Laureates and Leaders for Children, His Excellency Jose Ramos Horta.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at no point in my lifetime has this incredible inequality of our world been laid so bare. During every stage of the pandemic, the vast gap between wealthy and poor countries has been exposed, easily witnessed in the enormous disparities in access to quality online schooling, clean water, safe healthcare, adequate short-term financial support, and access to vaccines. Imagine if your family had to endure the pandemic without any of these protections. Would you survive? Child labor was increasing even before the pandemic started to 160 million. As we have heard, the ILO is predicting a further rise between the year 2020 and 22 to almost 170 million if nothing changes, and in the worst case scenario to 206 million. While the world gets richer, our children become poorer because our global economy is built by the richest on the backs of the poorest. Children in Latin America are mining minerals. Children in sub-Saharan Africa are growing cocoa beans, and children in Asia are stitching, clothing, all to meet the world's growing demands for these commodities. To make the kind of progress that children need, every child must be able to benefit from global wealth. Every child must have equitable access to public services which families in wealthy countries rely on, such as education, clean water and sanitation, and healthcare. We know that when families are insulated against extreme poverty by social protection such as family credits and welfare programs, children are not forced to work to survive. Only a quarter of the world's children have access to at least one form of social protection, compared to nearly half of the overall population. This is unacceptable. Countries must be supported to create strong social protection infrastructure using the knowledge gained during the pandemic, and implementation can be accelerated through a global social protection fund targeted at low-income countries. Specifically, governments must finance the implementation of a social protection floor for children and child-focused social protection measures, continue to implement social protection throughout all stages of life, and efforts should redress the balance between marginalized groups which currently receive no social protection coverage. Commit urgently to establish a global social protection fund for low-income countries. Not implement or force austerity measures in the wake of the pandemic, especially in countries which have yet to establish and implement all social floors. What is needed is easily within our reach. All that is required is a political will. No child should be forced to work. Until every child is free, none of us is free. We have the means to realize this. Only when every child has the necessary financial resources, policies, and social protections will we eradicate child labor for good. I thank you.
And now, Bishop Stalset, Honorary President of Religions for Peace, will share his call to action.
Till every child is free, none of us is free. We have the means to realize this. Child has the necessary financial resources, policies, and social protections, will we eradicate child.
Okay.
Bishop Stalset, Honorary President of Religions for Peace, will share his call to action.
Warm,
Every child is free, none of us.
warm greetings from Oslo. Good afternoon to all. My deep appreciation goes to the Nobel laureates for this critical initiative to end child labor, slavery, and trafficking.
We eradicate.
Jesus famously said that children belong to the kingdom of God. To me, this is a spiritual promise of a new humanity. It offers a moral prism that affirms the dignity of every child. It calls us to love and tenderness, to embrace the vulnerable in everyday solidarity. Let me share two examples from my own experience for many years with the Nobel Peace Prize Committee and Religions for Peace. Firstly, I am proud of many Nobel laureates on my watch, such as Ramos Horta and Kailash Satyarthi, our co-hosts today. Together with Bishop Carlos Belo, Horta led the freedom struggle for the long-suffering generations of East Timor-Leste. Kailash of India shared the Peace Prize with Malala Yousafzai of Pakistan, the youngest ever Nobel laureate. Their combined struggle against bonded labor and for children's rights to education, not least that of girls, continues unabated. Afghanistan is a stark reminder of that today. Faithful to their Christian, Hindu, and Muslim traditions, these Nobel laureates are ambassadors of hope for the world's long-suffering children. Secondly, Religions for Peace has a long humanitarian track record with UNICEF in the spirit of the Right of Child Convention. We have a proven strategic partnership of 50 years against nuclear destruction, poverty, and HIV/AIDS pandemic up to COVID-19 today. Our Interfaith Rainforest Initiative is a unique coalition of government, civil society, and indigenous people to combat the climate crisis and secure the future of our children. My plea today in the name of religion is not one of triumph, but of repentance and conversion. People of faith and people of no faith may form a global family of goodwill. We cannot be passive observers when the children's dignity is ignored or sabotaged, be it in the name of religion or ideology, culture or politics. The appalling abuse of children by religious men and women notwithstanding, I believe that there is no greater power to defend and uphold the rights of children at risk than faith, spirituality, and common sense of moral duty. So, dear people of faith and reason, science and politics, elimination of the scourge of child labor by 2025 is up to us. Together we can make it happen when each one of us do our fair share. If children belong to the kingdom of God, is it not our sacred duty to fight for their God-given dignity and for their human rights as equal citizens of this world? So let us continue this important and noble struggle. Thank you. It's up to us.
Now, I would like to introduce youth activist, Fair Share to End Child Labor campaign lead in Cameroon, and global trustee of the 100 million campaign, Ms. Tracy Kube.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tracy Kube, a global trustee of 100 million campaign and youth activist, and I send my warmest greetings from Cameroon to all the esteemed guests and audience of this important event. It is an honor to speak here today as a global trustee for the 100 million campaign on behalf of millions of other young people around the world who have been demanding that the most vulnerable children receive their fair share since the beginning of the pandemic. As youth activists, we know that those who were going to be the worst affected by the impact of COVID-19 were those who had no protection before it started. We have been mobilizing tirelessly for years now, united as over 50 youth-led organizations, student unions, grassroots groups in countless communities, decision-making spaces, and high-level events like this, calling for justice for every child. Our demand was not an unachievable one. We are living in a world that is rich enough to create a billionaire every single day, yet we are still allowing 10,000 children to be forced into child labor every single day too. It is not a case of not having the money or the knowledge to end child labor. The international community and national governments are making a choice to not act boldly or quickly enough, and millions of children are paying the cost of this decision with their freedom and their lives. Future generations will not understand why so much of humanity is being abandoned to extreme, life-threatening poverty when the world has never had more. This year, we have an unprecedented opportunity to right the wrong, but we can build back better when 74% of all children and 90% of children in the poorest countries are denied their rights to social protection and have no foundation to build anything on. This is why in Cameroon we have had several advocacy meetings aimed at sharing perceptions, so in one voice to call a louder tone in our country, alongside a number of grassroots organizations, including child labor survivors. We have written letters to the parliament and ministries concerned with either social protection or education. This is important for us because growing up in an environment full of youth delinquency, street kids, poor living conditions for kids with little access to health facilities and medication, we always hope for a better society for children. So on behalf of youth and student activists across the world, I am pleading with the world leaders to stop looking away from their responsibilities to the most vulnerable children. You have the power and the money to finally deliver a fair share of social protection. Now is the time for leadership. Thank you.
Joining us now is Dr. Zuzana Yakab, Deputy Director General of the World Health Organization.
Dear Mr. Satyarthi, Excellencies, dear colleagues, this year we celebrate the International Year for the Elimination of Child Labour. However, there is little to celebrate. The desperate plight of at least 160 million children who are subjected to child labour sadly demonstrates our collective failure to protect the rights of our young citizens. These children are robbed of their childhood, denied an education, suffer the worst health outcomes due to little or no access to health care, and have little access to clean water and sanitation. As always, it is the most marginalized children, those living on the edges of society, those mostly invisible, who disproportionately bear the burden. The socioeconomic impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic are threatening the hard-fought gains made in reducing the number of children engaged in child labour. We cannot allow this to happen. We must ensure that these children and their families have their fair share of resources, laws, and social protection. This includes urgent action to ensure that they are protected from the catastrophic financial consequences of paying for health services out of their own pockets. The movement for universal health coverage provides an opportunity to ensure that all children and their families receive the health services they need without suffering financial hardship. But we must prioritize the health needs and rights of those left furthest behind. This important event today provides member states, UN agencies, and civil society with a renewed opportunity to strengthen their commitments and actions required to protect our youngest citizens. WHO joins you in committing to doing all we can to eradicate child labour and leave no child behind, through a fair share in resources, policies, and social protection. I thank you again for giving us an opportunity to be part of this event and indeed this important movement to better protect our most vulnerable. WHO looks forward to further collaboration. Thank you.
I am pleased to welcome the President of the UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network and Director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University, Professor Jeffrey Sachs.
Thank you very much. I'm really honored and moved to be here. It's heartbreaking and just disgusting to listen to the testimonies of children and what they are put through. Now, practically speaking, while there are many reasons for these horrific abuses, one of the most important, I'd say the predominant, is poverty. And that means that we need resources so that kids are in school and not in mica mines. Now, where's the money? The money is with the rich countries and with rich people in the rich countries. I live in a rich country that treats its poor people in an incredibly nasty way. And we have a very hard time getting any money out of these rich hands because they're so arrogant, powerful, and corrupt that it is a real struggle. I suggest we focus on raising the financial resources in no uncertain terms now for universal schooling of all children. My own view is that if we can have the resources for education, we can ensure that children are not in the mines. They are in the classrooms, safe and learning and building for their future. We have several important meetings coming up. I won't call it a global community. There is no community. There are nations, some are awful, my own included much of the time, but they meet. And we need to put the absolute financial need on the table explicitly. So I believe that not only to end child labor, but to get kids in school, this wonderful organization needs to work with UNICEF and UNESCO and the UN leadership. And when the G20 meets, which is at the end of October, the 20 largest economies in the world, they know specifically this is what's needed. Otherwise, the kids are in school. Otherwise, the kids are in the mines. They're in child labor. And I believe that we need to go after the money now. Now, as of today, 500 people in the world have $8.3 trillion of wealth, while 160 million kids are in child labor. It's a disgusting fact. My country's so rich it could solve this problem in no time at all, but it spends the money on wars and on military expenditures. We need to put clearly the demand on. I know you've been doing it. I don't mean to be glib about it, but I want to help you go after the money and go after it now, because it's so cruel. It is so unnecessary. It's insane. It's vile. And the resources are there, but we can't just look to the impoverished country governments. I deal with those finance ministers every day. They don't have the funds. The money is with the rich. It needs to come out. It needs to go for universal schooling for all. That's what we promised to do. I hope I can help you in this absolutely essential cause. Thank you.
It is my pleasure to welcome the Honorable Rosa De Lauro, member of the United States House of Representatives, a lifelong champion of children.
Thank you so much, and good morning to everyone. Thank you for welcoming me here today, and I want to say a thank you to the laureates and leaders for children for this very, very special honor. What a privilege it is to discuss an issue that is so close to my heart, fighting child poverty through an expanded and an improved child tax credit. Let me also extend my sincere thanks to Mr. Satyarthi, His Excellency Prime Minister Löfven, Director General Ryder, Minister Ulstein, and Commissioner Fadil for this opportunity to discuss the recent creation of a child allowance in the United States of America. I want to say a particular thank you to the children who are participating today. I say thank you for your leadership, and I say we must follow the lead of the children or get out of the way so that they can lead. Thank you for participating and making us all move forward. Child poverty is a stain on the United States, and it has been that stain for many years. I do not say this lightly, but it is a matter of indifference to politicians and the result of policy choices. If there is a silver lining to this tragic global coronavirus pandemic, it is that it has shone a light on child poverty in the United States. The pandemic has exacerbated and amplified the need to support our most vulnerable, our children, and exacerbated and amplified the need and urgency to expand and to improve the child tax credit. Across America, the richest nation on the planet, more than 10 million children struggle against poverty, and the youngest children are the poorest. By design, the earlier child tax credit left out 1/3 of all children in the United States, children whose parents earned too little to qualify for a child tax credit. But today, I am proud that we are finally catching up to our peer nations that ensure children and families have the resources they need to be economically secure. Finally, on July 15th of this year, parents checked their bank balances and found that they had $300 per child deposited in their accounts. That was for children who are 6 years old and under, or $250 per child for children who were 6 to age 17. This month was the first monthly payment of the expanded and the improved child tax credit signed into law by President Biden as part of the American Rescue Plan. With the strong support and urging of my longtime collaborator, Speaker Nancy Pelosi. This monthly payment is a result of more than 18 years of fighting for a child allowance and finding that what poverty scholars have known for a very long time, a refundable child tax credit in combination with other poverty measures would cut the number of children in poverty by half. And after just the first month of payments, 3 million children had already been lifted out of poverty. Let me be clear. When families have sufficient resources, their children do better, they learn more, they are healthier, and as this group knows, a child allowance reduces the push toward child labor. This was once considered a very far out there proposal for the United States, though other nations have successfully implemented a child allowance or child benefit for decades. Prime Minister Löfven is probably thinking, what took the United States so long, considering Sweden has had a child allowance since 1948? But I would say it was not for lack of trying. That is why I am fighting to ensure that America's child allowance, our expanded and our approved child tax credit, is made permanent. If the Congress fails to do so, instead of cutting child poverty in half, we will only cut it by 7%. That is a poverty cliff, as we would throw millions of children and their families back into poverty. Additionally, we must work with other nations that have yet to create a child allowance and support their efforts to enact similar measures to help those children whose lives depend on economic support. We know the solution. We just need the will to take the bold steps to help the most vulnerable children. With a permanent, monthly, fully refundable child tax credit, America will finally join many in the world community by providing a near universal child allowance, also known as a child benefit to our nation's children. It would align the U.S. with international social security standards while helping children here in the United States. And may it provide hope for the world and show that there are paths to universal approaches to social protection. Indeed, COVID-19 will have the longest-term impacts on children, particularly the youngest, who remain the most vulnerable to economic shocks. It is time for the international community to come together and help to provide such security to our planet's most vulnerable, starting with our youngest children. To quote my friend and the President of the United States, Joe Biden, as we, quote, build back better, we must ensure that those who are most marginalized get their fair share, and our children have the support that they need to grow and to thrive. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this discussion.
Our final speaker is the man who brought us all together for this important event. 2014's Nobel laureate, Mr. Kailash Satyarthi.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. What an incredible event tonight or in the morning in the United States. This sends threefold messages to three different groups. One is for those who think that we have failed, we cannot accomplish goal related to child labor, we cannot eradicate child labor. This is also the message to those who love children, who wanted to do something, and they are looking for some opportunity. But this event also sends the strongest, loudest, and the most compelling message to the world leaders who are sitting and deliberating now in the United Nations General Assembly. last week when I was appointed the advocate for sustainable development goals by the Secretary General. Somebody, in fact, a journalist friend told me that, what can you do now? The situation is very grim, very depressing. And he was hopeless. Today, I challenge him. I hope that he might be listening to the strong voice of Mani Francis, who says that we have to rise above our past and be the change maker. A child soldier in South Sudan. I hope that he and others who feel hopeless must be listening to Manan Ansari, who lived as child slave. And he says, and challenging the world to act now without any delay. I hope that such people must be listening to Francisca, who is leading the group of survivors. And her challenge is also loud and clear, loud and clear. How many times people have seen that the statesman, the prime minister, like Stefan Löfven, coming together with the children, survivors, student leaders. How many times you have seen that the leader of the global parliaments, Martin, the well-known human rights activist, Kerry Kennedy, the Secretary General, Guy Ryder, and the leaders from UNESCO, from WHO, and other agencies have come together at one platform in one evening in 1 hour. This is historic. There's loud and clear message that the youth are not going to wait and watch anymore. The message is loud and clear that the world leaders who are sitting cannot keep on talking. But before that, let me tell you that many of those who are survivors themselves are taking leadership role. A few thousand children have been rescued with the help of children who lived in slavery, who were trafficked and sold and resold like animals and lesser price than the animals in India. When I was talking to a young man last week or 10 days ago, he said that he was so happy that day when he has been successful in bringing back a child, a boy, who was missing and trafficked about a year or year and a half ago. And this boy's mother told to this young activist, a former survivor, that I did not sleep for a year. I could not eat properly for a year. Today is the time when I am going to sleep comfortably in peace. Another boy told me that a father made a mistake. He has been befooled by some traffickers and sent his son to work. But the son was not able to bring back any money and no news. When another survivor leader has rescued or helped in rescuing that boy, the father says that I'm not going to allow anyone outsider in my village, so that not only in my son's case, but no one is trafficked from my village. Dear friends, this shows the moral responsibility. This shows the utmost urgency. This is the time to think like a mother who could not sleep for a year. This is the time to think like a father who could not save his son and now he feels that he has made a mistake. This is the time for young people to demonstrate their compassion in action without waiting for others, politicians or bureaucrats to act. This is the time. But dear friends, the most important is that the same moral courage should be demonstrated by the world leaders, the presidents and prime minister and heads of the nation, who are now delivering on development, who are delivering on human rights and well-being of the world and climate change, they should have moral courage to say that yes, we have failed our children in pre-pandemic 4 years. They should have moral courage to say that we are responsible. Somebody has to take the responsibility. How long we will keep on just passing on the responsibility on each other? Somebody has to take responsibility that why these children have become, why every day 10,000 children between the age of 5 and 11 were pushed into slavery and child labor. When the world has gone $10 trillion richer, who will take the responsibility? Do we keep on living in the paucity, in the lack of morality and leadership and honesty and courage? This is unacceptable. And therefore today's event is loud and clear. The young people, student leaders from all across the world, from Latin America, Africa, Asia, have joined today. And as I said, the leaders from all walks of life, the global trade union leader, Sharan, have come as a strong advocate for children. And so was the case of Nobel laureates, lawmakers. Strong voice come from the lawmakers, including from the congresswoman in United States. I'm thankful to all my colleagues, the steering committee members, President Horta, Kerry Kennedy, my dear sister Lorena, who have participated and led this conversation. And dear friends, when you go back tonight, go with this resolve, a new resolve that we are not going to tolerate it. We are there. And when we finished the global march in 1998, some of you might recall that I said that we will keep on knocking every single door until and unless this ILO convention is universally ratified. And we did this. And today I am saying that we, as the students, survivors, laureates, and social leaders, will keep on knocking on the doors. Student unions and teachers unions and trade union leaders, we will keep on knocking the doors of every single government and president and prime minister until you accept that eradication of child labor is my priority. We are not going to leave it like that. We will keep on marching. We have globalized, dear friends, everything. Technology, businesses, market. This is the time to globalize compassion for our children. This is the time to globalize morality. This is the time to globalize justice. This is the time to globalize our responsibility for our children. And this is the time to globalize accountability among each other. As I said in my opening remark, nobody can stop us. We are marching. We will win. Thank you so much. Thank you.
This concludes the Fair Share to End Child Labor, Survivors and Leaders on Social Protection events. Thank you to the organizers, all the laureates and leaders, and especially to each one of you for joining us. In the first 4 years of the SDGs, the number of child laborers aged 5 to 11 increased by over 10,000 a day. That is the equivalent of 600 children being forced into child labor since the start of this event. This week during the United Nations General Assembly, the international community has an unprecedented opportunity to accelerate action that ends the injustice of child labor once and for all by delivering a fair share of social protection. We encourage you to use what you have heard at today's event as a tool during this UN General Assembly, especially the high-level meeting taking place on the 28th of September on jobs and social protection for poverty eradication, and other critical global meetings taking place in the next few months. Together we can collectively amplify this message and demand our governments across the world do not fail the world's children. On behalf of the world's children and young people, I thank you.
Once again, we raise our voices in celebration, rising up.